Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now today, I'm honoured to be speaking with Skye, Eddy, Bruce. Skye, welcome to the Sports Psych Show.
Thanks, Dan. I'm so glad we were able to make this happen.
Well, the shoe is on the other foot here because for a number of years you've interviewed me, and so I get to exact my revenge here over the next hour or so and field the questions, and I'll try and make them as tough as I possibly can, just to exact that revenge on you. So I'm looking forward to this, Skye. I'm only joking. No, look, it's awesome to have you on. We've been meaning to do this for a long time, and I almost feel a bit silly with this request. But for those who don't know you, which will be so few people, but for those who don't know you, why don't you introduce yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience?
Sure, you bet. I think that I'm starting to grow my audience in the UK, so I bet a lot of people that are listening, if they are from the UK, probably don't know who I am. I am the founder of Soccer Parenting. I'm working to inspire players by empowering parents, and we'll get into that and what that really means, because I know that raises some red flags for some people when they hear that. I am a former player. I grew up in the game. I'm a soccer player, goalkeeper, played collegiately, played professionally briefly in Italy. I am an active coach, so I have my USSF B license. I'm a grassroots instructor for US Soccer. I'm a goalkeeping instructor for United Soccer Coaches, and I'm an active youth coach myself. And I'm also a soccer parent. I have 2 kids that are playing in the game. My daughter is playing collegiately, and my son is a recreational level player in high school age. So, the work that I'm doing is working to shift culture, shift awareness, help coaches, clubs rethink the role that a parent plays in the sporting experience of their child.
So you truly are living the life that you're coaching, essentially, or trying to coach parents on.
Yeah, I am. And I'm also, a lot of the work I do, Dan, is with coaches and helping them shift their mindset. So for sure, I am right in the middle of it with my children. So much of the work that I've done in these last few years has been understanding my daughter's experience. And I say and reference her a little bit more because she's more of a high performance player, and I had a little bit more stress as a parent with her than I had with my son. So much of the work I'm doing has been navigating that, understanding that, having clarity around that, and sharing those experiences with parents. And also really, like I've said, just, rethinking the coach, club, parent relationship dynamic.
Before we get on to talking about parents, coaches, I always try to start things with people who have a rich background in playing the sport that they coach. You were, as you say, a collegiate athlete, and this is the Sports Psych Show, so I do want to talk about sports psychology and mental skills. When you reflect back on your playing days, Skye, how good were you mentally, would you say? When you reflect back, were you really good mentally? Could it have improved? I was horrendous mentally as a pro golfer. What about yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that I had a lot of really strong attributes from a mental side of the game. If I can look at it from like how hard I would push myself, my focus, my determination, how my ability to zone in and connect in the moment of the games. But I also really struggled with competition. I'm a goalkeeper. And when I got to the highest level, competing at a national team type level, I played collegiately. The other goalkeeper on the team was Brianna Skye, who many people will know. She was a longtime national team goalkeeper in the United States. She's who I competed against for playing time collegiately, and she and I played every other game for many years. And it was just a constant struggle, and I learned a ton from that. But in the moment, it was really, really hard. And then my last game collegiately was in the national championships. We lost in the national championship game. I was the goalkeeper. We lost 6-0 to Chapel Hill.
Right.
It was a horrendous game. I had like 47 saves, but I will tell you right now, I totally totally just froze up in the game and wasn't on my A game. So unfortunately, that's like one of the big things that I look back on, and it's really easy for me to focus on that last game. But if I can peel back those layers a little bit, I do feel like, generally speaking, I have pretty strong mentality towards competition and towards competing.
That's really interesting. So, on the one hand, you talk about having that drive, willpower, determination, and obviously you against somebody else for that first team spot. Although it was spread out alternatively, you were against her, and that pushed you. And in that last game, under the gun, and I'm sorry, I'm going to get you to recall this slightly, so I beg your pardon. But when you reflect back, do you think that you might have done, but if you had, say, learnt a mental skills framework or gone purposefully and intentionally through a process of learning mental skills, that you may not have had that kind of game for your last game?
Absolutely. 100%. I don't doubt that for a moment. I mean, I literally was in the warm-up and dropping every ball. I literally just, like, I know there's a psychological term for this, but I was so out of sync. And I had moments in the game where everything came together and I wasn't nervous, but the first goal that was scored against us was totally my fault from a decision-making standpoint. I went for a breakaway that I should have stayed for, and I made that decision hundreds of other times and made it correctly. So, if I had some help and support, or even somebody in that moment, I remember during the warm-up, I actually went to the sideline fence line to talk to one of my best friends, Holly, a national team player who I had played with for many years, and said, "Hey, what's wrong with me?" So I wish that I had somebody to go to, a tools to be able to reference, or a plan in that moment, and I definitely didn't.
You're moving on to that coaching piece. You're engaging with coaches across North America, starting to engage with coaches across the globe. With that mental skills piece, we'll start there because that's a good entrance point. With that mental skills piece, with that sports psychology piece, do you think coaches are starting to open up to that a bit more now?
Yeah, I do. I feel like there's so much that's being thrown, especially in our youth game right now, to coaches to grab onto, whether it be different practice preparations and planning, or whether it be, making the learning environment more challenging for players. Like, there's so much that's thrown at our youth coach right now. I think it's still getting a little bit left behind. And quite frankly, as coaches, we're not trained to be able to support players like this. And so, me, a lot of the work that I'm doing with coaches is emotional intelligence and coaching. Like, I'm training coaches on that. And so until coaches are really self-aware, it's really going to be challenging for them to be able to manage the mental performance of the players adequately, appropriately, coming at it from the right frame of reference. So we have a lot of challenges, but I do think that there's a collective awareness. I would imagine you agree, like a collective awareness in the youth game that this is a really important component of the game that needs to be addressed.
I 100% agree with you, and it's interesting you mentioned about self-awareness. You talked about emotional intelligence, which is where I want to dive into now, but those self-skills, I call them self-skills, and I 100% agree with you. I think that's the entrance point when it comes to the psychosocial side of the game for coaches, is the capacity to build self-awareness, to self-regulate, to self-reflect. Those are the three self-skills that I pinpoint. Is that self-awareness piece, is that very much related to the conversations you're having with coaches?
In a parallel way, because a lot of the work that I'm doing with soccer parenting is historically, we have had these coaches that have these egos that don't want to connect with parents, that say, you stay over there and we're going to be over here. And they don't want to welcome this engaging relationship with parents, despite what the research says about how the performance environment will shift and change if you do engage with parents. So collectively, I've been trying to to tackle the ego-filled coach. And I am so excited to say that, our culture is changing, that coaches that I am collaborating with, working with, club-wide, we're seeing just amazing things change with these ego-filled coaches. Our leaders are so much more, vulnerable and open to learning than I've ever seen before. So I do think that that's, kind of jumpstarting our ability to now support players in better, unique, powerful ways from a mental performance standpoint. So it's not exactly directly what I'm dealing with, but parallel, I'm dealing a lot with self-awareness and, bringing people together. And to do that and to have people come together in a powerful, real way that will facilitate change, it has to be in a really vulnerable, real manner.
You use the term ego-filled coaches. What do you mean by that? And can you give us an example of what that kind of looks like?
Sure. So I think I kind of alluded to the example of the coach that historically over time has stayed on their side of the field, has not been willing to connect with parents, has really almost gone out of their way to put that barrier up, and is assumed that every parent, what I say to coaches when I'm working with them is like, not all parents are crazy. And we've put this assumption, sorry if that's not like a politically correct term to use, but I do refer to crazy soccer parents a lot. And we have lumped all parents into that category. And it's a massive lack of trust that's happened. So that's one example of the ego-filled coach. I would say that part of that is based on just historically what they've been taught to do. And so they're just following the guidelines and what they've seen society-wise and from their mentors and have done the same thing. But the second reason for that is, coaches lacking in confidence. And so, diving into coach efficacy and, the coach's confidence in their ability to lead and instruct and guide and teach individual players, plays into that. Another example that I think is really relatable is, and I don't know historically how, the FA and, what the mentality has been in coach education. But for me, when I was coming up in the game, receiving my licenses in coach education, it was a really, really strong division between the instructors and the candidates. And there was no connection or collaboration. And the instructors were really, if I went to them, for instance, with a question about my topic, and the response that I got very gruffly was, well, I can't talk to you about that. Go ask another candidate, and I'm like, well, you're the instructor, like this. So that historically has filtered down into our youth game as all of us have gone through these coaching programs. I will also say really, really optimistically that that's changing too. And I have heard so many great things from coaches that have gone through our U.S. soccer, specifically coach education programs, getting their B license, getting their A license. I'm proud to be a grassroots instructor myself right now. And it's really open, collaborative environment. And that's because we have some great leaders in coach education at U.S. Soccer that are really changing the mentality of what it means to be instructor, what it means to learn. So all of these things are super, obviously real positives and are trickling down into a more trust-filled relationships in the youth game.
I think that's really interesting, Skye. I've just written some notes here and just feeding this back to you. I almost hear an individual problem, a cultural problem, and a systemic problem. That individual problem being a lack of confidence, anxiety, fear. And as I suppose as a psychologist, I'm kind of putting myself in the boots, the cleats of coaches and thinking how they might predict confrontation, arguments, and they'll try and avoid that because they're anxious, because they don't know if they're going to be able to articulate what they're trying to do or be able to respond to parents effectively or efficaciously. I hear a cultural problem as in this is how we've always done it, that they've seen it through their own mentors, which feeds into the systemic problem, which is, as you said, historically, it sounds like the licenses have been delivered quite hierarchically. There hasn't been that collaboration, and so coaches don't automatically want to collaborate with parents. But now where you're starting, that collaboration is starting to push through, maybe there might be some behaviour change. So systemic, cultural and individual.
I would absolutely agree. And I think you're spot on with that. And I will say, though, again, because I don't, in my work, I try not to spend too much time on like where we've been. And I really want to focus on like where we're going. And I do a lot of teaching about establishing trust in the coach-parent relationship. And, that is, to me, foundational to this issue that we're talking about with, when you talk about systemic or cultural, individual, it's trust. And, our lack of trust in the system, our lack of trust in, how we've interacted in our past with the system, and, this lack of trust in these individual relationships we have now. So that's where I've chosen to start. And it's been really exciting to see the changes.
Well, I love the fact you pointed out that I'm problem-oriented and you're solution-focused. So that's 1-0 to you. Great stuff.
It's really easy to like have the whole conversation be about the problem, because
of course
it's so it's so apparent to us. But I do feel like let's move on and let's talking about solutions, because they're there, and the clubs that are implementing this type of programming are seeing like fantastic differences and changes and player retention. Like there's some real positive things that are happening when clubs are buying into these concepts, taking the time to educate their coaches and support them.
Yeah, I'm just being a classical psychologist trying to over-intellectualize stuff, that's all. But one word you said there which really grabbed my attention was trust. And, I know so much of, I've been working with you, alongside you, for the last, course, 6 or 7 years now, isn't it, Skye? And I've seen you in action. I've been in the room when you've delivered. So I know the great work you're doing around North America, and as you've mentioned, you're starting to reach out to the audience in the UK. And I can say for certain that, we need your great work. And so with that in mind, trust, where does that start? How do you start that process of trust? Or just even if we don't go down the path of trust, how do you help bring coaches and parents together? What are those first few steps?
Yeah, those are great questions. I mean, to backtrack just for a second and talk about trust, like trust, if we're a trust-filled organization, like what the research says about trust is that, we'll see increased value in our organization. So if we're a youth club, that means that we're positively impacting more kids' lives. That's increased value. Obviously, there's financial gains to that too. It'll have accelerated growth and innovation. So you're a youth club and you want to, like, for instance, pool play, your U11s, your U12s, you bring that idea to parents and they're like, yes, because they have trust and they're open to innovation. Improve collaboration. And, especially now with everything that's going on with COVID, like we need collaboration amongst our organizations to work through this. So we need to see that. Better execution of things, impacting more kids' lives, more loyalty. So like trust is a real business principle that we need to layer into the work that we're doing in football or in soccer. I talk about trust a lot, and establishing trust, something as simple as knowing the first name of all the parents on the teams that you coach is essential. We talk about, opening the door to parents, setting appropriate boundaries, and being clear about what those boundaries are really helps establish trust. Talking straight to parents. So there's an issue with a child developmentally. They're just maybe not on the right level. Maybe they're too advanced or not advanced enough for this level, and they need to switch to a different team. Having that conversation with a coach, or you're seeing, the player not performing mentally, and there's a lot of room for improvement. Having that transformational type conversation with a parent will establish trust. Keeping our promises, we say we're going to give evaluations for players, actually following through and doing that. I mean, there's so many key ways that we can build trust. And I really do, when I'm out speaking and I ask coaches to raise their hand, how many of you know the first name of all the parents on the teams that you coach? And I would say maybe 10, possibly 15% of the coaches will raise their hands. And I think we can start there.
I think that's a great starting point. And in my work, I talk about coaches being psychosocial coaches, and not just that X and O coach, that tac coach, if you like. I think that chimes in nicely with that. And just going back to the start of your dialogue there, I think the one word that hits home for me is values, and values that underpin the behaviours and the philosophies. You spoke there really articulately about, I heard, just behaviours and philosophies, basically just good behaviours, good philosophies, such as accelerated growth and collaboration, and positively impacting your child's life. But I think what's really interesting, Skye, and I'll get your comment on this, is that I think that we've been so socialised in sport over the last 50 years maybe. We play sport to get better at sport. We play sport to compete in sport, but we've never really sold the participative angle of sport and the life. I suppose we have sold the life benefits, and sometimes we oversell those, but just the participative benefits. And I think that's what I hear that you're kind of doing. Those are the values, the participative benefits, being involved with our club.
Absolutely. You were asking me about trust before, and I think it's interesting that I answer that from like the coach-parent relationship, but also having coaches that are establishing trust with the players is essential to all of this as well. And a player feeling heard and cared about and is essential to that. And I think that those are foundational things when we're talking about when we are talking about life lessons. One of the value statements at Soccer Parenting, that I have value statements that I encourage the parents to review and reflect upon and implement, because like you said, it's our values that guide our behavior. So one of our value statements is life lessons, and we support our children's youth soccer participation because we want them to develop grit, determination, and resiliency while learning the empathy, compassion, and solidarity that will make them caring and committed adults. And we need coaches on board with that too. And so in order for those life lessons to become apparent, the coaches have to find, and you're talking about just the psychosocial, they have to find the ability to connect with players that way and develop those skills so that they're able to learn that. And to me, the backstory to all of this is going back to just a love of the game. And somewhere along the way, with all of these, we call it, and I'm using air quotes here, like the professionalization of youth sport, we've often lost this love of the game. Maybe this is more relevant to the American soccer community than the UK footballing community, because you all have more of a cultural background and a connection to the game. But for us, what I've seen happen in the last 10, 15 years is that this deep love and connection to the sport from a child isn't happening so much because they have so much pressure on them from a performance standpoint. And we need coaches that their number one priority is helping kids develop a connection, to feel inspired by the game, so that they'll, take this connection and inspiration with them into a healthy adulthood.
So what does the landscape look like in America, in North America, in terms of that? For me, Skye, I almost see the participative age maybe up to, 12, 13 years old, 14 years old, and then a young person might say, hey, I'm quite serious about this. You're dealing with coaches all the time. What does that landscape look like? Do you think coaches are professionalizing things too early? Do you think they're taking 8, 9, 10-year-olds and making things far too serious? Or do you think there is some room for that? What's your...
Well, so I believe that instead of this being like an inherent coach issue, like the coach is taking it too far, I think it's really more of a structural societal issue that we have right now.
Yeah.
So there are coaches that are taking it too far, and there are parents who are putting way too much pressure on their young children. But those people get a lot of attention because they're who we talk about. But what is underlying and underpinning to this is the vast majority of very level-headed coaches and level-headed parents who are just seeking guidance and aren't quite sure. And so I do believe that in the States, like, our structures are such that a lot of this doesn't make sense. I coach at a U10 level. And so I have, in my U10 team, it's almost year round. It's They play and train through the winter indoors. They have a couple months off in the summer. We do encourage kids to play other sports in our club. But what happens is that there's just this sort of competition for these athletic kids. They're 9, like prepubescent kids. Like, can we really even classify anyone at this point? Obviously, I understand that. But, this is a business. And so this is a structural issue we're dealing with as well. I'm hoping that, we need to rethink our structures and create different types of programming that support the athletic development of children. And we don't have an organizing body. Like, you all have Nick Levitt with UK coaching, who's doing some great work, overseeing coach education on a variety of levels. In the United States, we have no organization, government funded or non-government funded, that has any oversight over sport and over coaching. So we do have our challenges, because that leads people to be able to do whatever they want, based on what they choose. So whoever the leadership is at these organizations sort of can dictate the pathways for children and how intense it will be at younger ages and such.
I sometimes wonder if your size is your strength, but also your weakness, essentially, that it's so hard to mobilize that kind of, as you alluded to, you mentioned Nick Levitt and UK coaching, and we're such a small nation that to mobilize that kind of process, that program, is so much easier.
Absolutely. No, I mean, our size is our greatest asset and our biggest weakness, 100%. And it builds into the structural issues that we have as well. So now, and this lack of trust and the lack of leadership from U.S. Soccer. So we have leagues competing against each other for teams to participate. So I live in a pretty metropolitan area. I'm an hour and a half from Washington, D.C. There is tons of great football around here. And my daughter's team, we would drive 8 hours to play a league game. So basically, we would drive from London to Rome. Maybe, I don't know. That's, to play a match a day. It's crazy. So when there's all this other great, soccer culture and teams and adequate competition closer, much closer. But because those leagues are competing for teams, the other teams that are of equal quality to my daughter's team are in a different league, so we can't play them on a weekend. So there's a lot of inherent challenges, but there are good leaders that are coming in place, and I really do believe I've predicted this before and been wrong, but I do believe that we're closer to a tipping point in terms of getting things organized. I'm seeing really, really exciting collaborations amongst clubs and even these leagues. They're starting to talk. So exciting things, I hope.
Coming back to parents, how do you shift that mentality, if you want to shift that mentality, that relates to parents sort of ranting and raving about my 10-year-old son is going to be the next Premier League player. He says he wants to play in Europe. She wants to play for the US women's national team, which 10-year-olds say, of course they do. And parents suddenly take it so seriously, and within a few years, quite often they've dropped out because they've burnt out. How do you, because I think for a lot of parents what they think is that, okay, my child wants to be this great player, so they've got to take it really, really seriously. They've got to work really hard at the game. It's got to be the only sport that they play. You talked about systemic problems, and I understand and appreciate the vast majority of coaches and parents are level-headed, but how do we help parents to perhaps understand, and you might disagree with me here, but understand that that's probably not the healthy path in which to help your child or to ask your child to go on to travel?
Yeah. Well, first, why would you say I disagree with you? I 100% agree with you.
I don't know.
I'm completely aligned with that. But it's interesting, even though as a parent, I'm driving 8 hours and I'm doing this work and I'm like, my head is spinning. So yes, there are like conflicts to all of this. But I think it starts with education. So we think about parent engagement, and there's lots of components to parent engagement. But one of the really important components is education. And as a footballing nation or our culture, we have not adequately given parents access to the education that they need. Parents don't know the term long-term athletic development. Parents don't understand functional movement skills. Parents don't have conversation or the ability to speak about their child and pathways and the developmental process. So that's what I'm attempting to do with soccer parenting is I have created an education platform that coaches and clubs are providing their parents that gives parents access to this content. So now they have a resource and a moment to be able to learn. So and then I do find that once parents have language and they hear, oh wow, there is this research or there are these terms and it resonates with parents and it gives them some strength and some clarity in their child's pathway. So the more that we can, one, bring parents together to share those conversations, learn from each other, grow with each other is, obviously we're going to see a lot of change from that. But once coaches and clubs are, talking to parents about long-term athletic development and giving that education to parents. And I think we'll start to see a shift. We're starting to see a shift. It will continue to shift and build some momentum towards that.
Should parents stay silent on the sidelines?
It depends on what their child wants.
Okay.
Yeah. So the education that I do around that is supportive, distracting, hostile communication. We in the United States have these silent Saturdays and tell parents, you can't talk today. It's a silent Saturday. It's this experiment we're doing and reflect and learn from it. We walk around and we give parents lollipops if they're talking too much. And I just don't think that those are adequate interventions for parents to deal with sideline behavior or coaches. So at Soccer Parenting, we educate around this terminology. You have supportive communication, hostile communication, and distracting communication. And when we can teach parents and coaches the difference between supportive and distracting communication, that's when we'll see some change to the sidelines. That's when we are seeing change. So I used the Stroop effect test that I first saw with you presenting at the convention, Dan, many years ago. And I do that with parents to say, this is how your child feels when they're trying to perform and you are distracting them with telling them what to do. And the light bulbs go off for coaches and for parents there. So part of that is ask your child what they want. Because my daughter, she says, Mom, I hear your voice. Even if you're telling Hannah, her goalkeeper, that she made a great save, it distracts me. I just really don't want to hear your voice. So at Callie's games, I sit there in attentive silence. I'm paying attention. I'm not on my phone. I'm supporting her. But I am literally quiet because that's what she wants and it's her game. My son likes to hear my voice. He likes to hear me cheering him on or telling him good job, and that is a little boost for him. So he's okay with my supportive communication. So I do communicate supportively only at his games.
So that parental process you're suggesting should be very autonomy supportive.
Oh wow, that's a psych term.
No, sorry. Allow your child to
make the decision. Yeah, absolutely. It's the child's game. I mean, what I find fascinating and what I think is a really good exercise for parents is for them to really reflect on what they're thinking in the middle of a game when they're at their child's game, like the amount of stress, the amount of anxiety, the heart racing that is happening when your child is performing is really, really significant. And it's really important that we're aware of that so then we can start to manage it. That's where you come in. I don't know all about that, but managing your stress on the sidelines. But we need to realize that, there's a lot of work to be done there. And there are some really positive interventions that coaches and clubs can do, that parents can do in terms of really shifting sideline behavior, which is an inherent problem across all sports.
No, I love that, Skye. Very, very simple, supportive, hostile, and distracting, and just emphasising the importance of working towards being supportive. You made a comment there, a little comment. It's the child's game. It's the child's game. When do you think parents can get involved, or where do you think parents can be involved?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, my collaborations with you and every time I've asked you to come on for an interview or to be a part of an educational program I'm doing for parents or coaches, I so appreciate your willingness to do that. I think that parents are uniquely positioned to support their child with the mental side of the game. We know our children better than anyone. These are really transformational, exciting conversations that we can have with our children in helping them develop skills for life. So definitely, on the mental side of the game is probably what I see as like the most effective way that a parent can support their child. I also think that, just in terms of, for us, parents developing these moments of ignition is really key for us here, again, in the States, maybe more in the UK, because it's just we don't have the strong footballing culture. So even putting the Premier League on in the morning so that it's just on in the background on Saturdays, or taking your child to a game, or helping them find a team to start supporting, all of those types of things are key things that parents can do.
Yeah, I think going back to that the mental skills, or just emotional support, I completely agree, and clearly I agree because this is what we've spoken about before. But I think it's really interesting, Skye, as human beings. I'm sure I've said this plenty of times on the Sports Site show before. We're brilliant as human beings at being black and white about things rather than shades of grey. We go to the left side or the right side, and we don't hit the middle ground very well. And I think that, as you've mentioned, when you've got those silent Sundays or silent Saturdays on the sidelines or whatever in the States, and we've had similar stuff over here, and you kind of scratch your head and you go, yeah, but that kind of misses the point. And we've had sports celebrities being interviewed over here saying parents shouldn't be involved at all, and you just think, well, hang on, that's crazy talk. That's as crazy as parents being overbearing. So it's just hitting that middle ground, and I've always felt that the mental side is important for that. And having soccer balls around the house and putting on a Premier League and things like that, and other balls and things like that, I just think are so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right about the gray. It's hard to find that sometimes, and I think a lot of that is just because as coaches and even as parents, like, we don't quite understand this parent-coach relationship. There's a lot of mixed messages. You have people going on your TV saying, parents stay away. Parents are being told not to be a helicopter parent. Parents are told not to be a lawnmower parent. Let your child, develop their own path, and all these concepts of autonomy that are confusing. And so parents are getting a lot of mixed messages around this as well, which is why in the work that I'm doing, we are having to really clarify what we're talking about, because this term parent engagement is just a big term that people use a lot, but there's actually real clarity around what it means. And there's also really a lot of clarity and important research about the benefits of parent engagement. There's so much research about parent engagement in schools, and that we can translate into clubs, clubs that actively engage parents, coaches that actively engage parents with a specific plan. The clubs will perform higher. The players will train on their own. The players will have higher aspirations and motivations. Fewer kids will quit playing. The coaches will be more satisfied. The parents will be empathetic. That's what the research is so clear on, what happens with parent engagement programs in schools. And I think that we can relate that to clubs. And we are seeing that happen with clubs that are really implementing these programs here in the States. And it produces a much stronger sense of community within the clubs, which is also really important to kids falling in love with the game and it being just a part of their life.
So with that in mind, do you say parents, the tech side of things, that's off limits? That's not a place to go? How do you help parents treat that side of the game?
Yeah, so I think it's essential that we have really clear boundaries. I think it's essential because this coach-parent relationship is so confusing, and there's so much not uncertainty around it. Even parents on my teams that I've coached, knowing the work that I do, are nervous to come and talk to me. Even me with my daughter, a couple years ago, me being nervous, I literally would walk up to her coach and I could feel anxiety building in my body because of the conversation that I wanted to have with him about her level of inspiration, which I think is a good conversation for a parent and coach to have. So I think it's important we establish boundaries. And what I tell coaches, you need to open the door and you need to close the door. It needs to be really clear. Parents, these are the conversations that I welcome. I welcome conversations about, your child's level of inspiration. So if for repeatedly 3 weeks in a row, they get into the car after training and they're not in a great mood, please come talk to me about it. That's something I need to know and we need to dive into. And if your child isn't feeling as inspired as they should be, then the door is 100% open. The door is open to parents. If you have a question about the game itself, meaning like you don't quite understand offside law of the game, or if you wanted information about a system and why when you went from 7-v7 to 9v9, the system changed this way, like those are great conversations, and the door should be open to parents about those types of things. And at the same time, the door should also be closed. Like it is not okay for you as a parent to come and talk to me about another player on the team. I don't care if they didn't come to training twice this week and they started the game. I don't care if you feel like they're not up to par with the other athletes on the team. That is not a conversation that is allowable between us. I mean, we need to get that clear and be that concise with parents and have that clarity in our boundaries. Or it's not okay to come and talk to me about a tactical decision that I make during the game. So if I started a certain player, or if I made a substitution at a certain time, or if I, only put encourage them to do a 2-man wall instead of a 4-man wall and they scored a goal, that's not a conversation to have with me. So once we get really clear on those boundaries, Dan, then it actually, I think what we find is that the level-headed parents, because the last thing they want is to be perceived as a crazy one, so then the level-headed parents really gravitate towards those boundaries, and then those conversations can start happening more freely, which will establish trust, which will build into all of the things that we've been talking about.
I've got two questions off the back of that, and one is related to one of the boundaries you suggested, and the word that came through to me there was fairness. So you said a coach might say to parents, don't come and have a conversation with me if somebody hasn't turned up for training a couple of times this week, but I'm still picking them. I suppose as a psychologist, I'm thinking my knowledge of, let's say, the brain and nervous system is, I think that parents might construe that as unfair, and when we perceive things to be unfair, that can cause a stress response. I don't even know, Skye, if there's a question there. That just was like, because I've definitely had conversations. I mean, I agree that should be part of a boundary, but I know that hits that unfairness button, and so many parents, it's like a red rag to a bull. That's unfair. That's not right. We're paying, for example, in North America, we're paying a lot of money here. Where does, I don't know. I just wanted to get your comment on that.
This is where the gray area comes in.
Yeah.
This is where the gray area comes in. Because quite possibly the child didn't come to training because their parents are getting divorced and they're in the middle of moving.
Yeah.
And you want that kid to get in the game. Like, who knows? Like, that's where the gray area has to come in, and the parents have to trust the coach. And that's where coaches also have to get better. Like, we have to make really good decisions. You can't play the kid that doesn't show up only because you want to win the game. Like, we all need to get better. And I think the big picture of parent engagement and opening these conversations is that it will make youth soccer better. And that's, the tagline I use all the time socially in the work that I'm doing is make youth soccer better. And I do believe that collaborative relationships between coaches, clubs, parents, and players is in the best interest of player development. And what collaborative relationship means is a big gray area question. Your response there about, the parents that, kind of feel a bit of an uproar to that is if it's a trust-filled relationship, and if the coach is working to establish trust, then that response won't be as prevalent. There'll be a couple of parents who maybe feel that way, but that response won't be as prevalent.
Yeah, as you keep emphasising, a collaborative effort. I to answer my own question or to respond to my own statement about fairness, I wrote down the word symbiosis. It's that symbiotic relationship between the coach and the parent, isn't it? And it's the in-between that matters. It's so important. I love it. Yeah, and
I'm going to use that term. I like that.
I think, just last point on this. Parental challenges, player challenges, and I suppose I have had conversations, quite a lot of conversations with parents and with kids, is that the coach quality piece. As you mentioned there, everybody's got to get better. But the reality is that coaches also have to get better at being coaches, because I've had a lot of conversations over the years with parents and with players who have said, rightly or wrongly, correctly or incorrectly, Coach Joe, Coach Jim, Coach Susan, well, he or she just isn't very good. They're not coaching us very well.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's as a consequence of, volunteer coaching or whatever it may be, but also impacting that coach-parent relationship and impacting the parent-club relationship is the quality of coaching, the standard of coaching, which might sound quite harsh, I don't know, but that also needs to improve, right, doesn't it? We need to be better at our jobs, all of us.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of room for improvement. I mean, there's a lot of ways that we all can get better, but we have to start somewhere. And a lot of the stresses that parents have are valid, are completely valid, and those need to be addressed as well. That's where, for us, club leadership really comes into play, and I do want parents to feel like some validation when they have a stressful situation, whether it be a coach that's not qualified, an ego-filled coach, a coach that's joysticking the players around the field and they know that that's not okay, a coach that's putting too much pressure on players. Like, all of these things happen all the time. Of course, I hear from parents about that all the time. And, this is how we need to get better. And I think that this collaborative relationships and clubs that are filled with great leaders who are overseeing coaches and the playing environment and the developmental environment correctly, this is progress. And it's not going to happen overnight. We're not going to all of a sudden have enough qualified coaches to work with all the players that want to play. But we are getting better, and our education is getting better. And now we're starting to talk about things like mandatory coach education and relationship building education for coaches. And this is really exciting to see.
It makes it probably the toughest profession or hobby in the world, coaching. It really is challenging, isn't it? Because you're dealing with different players and parents' wants, needs, hopes, doubts, beliefs, etc., etc. Yeah. So it's challenging.
Absolutely.
And I know that a great solution to that is or lies in your programs. And I know from this conversation you will have tapped the interest of a lot of the audience with regard your stuff. So, Skye, how can people get in contact with you? Are you on social media? Clearly a rhetorical question there, because you clearly are.
Absolutely. So my public website is soccerparenting.com. So feel free to check that out. You can connect with me. My email is there, skye@soccerparenting.com. I am on all social channels at Soccer Parenting, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Twitter is a great way to reach out to me via messaging, but sending me an email, reaching out via social channels, I really am here to help. All of the work that I'm doing is deeply rooted in the fact that I really do want to make this game better. I want more children to find inspiration from the game, like I've been so lucky to for my whole life. And I know that together that we have the capacity to really, really make youth soccer better. So I really appreciate being here, Dan. This has been a great conversation.
Awesome. No, thank you. Been brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, Skye.
You bet. Thanks.
Hey everyone, I really enjoyed that podcast and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, thinks. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or on my website danabrahams.com to tell me exactly what you think. And if you do have any suggestions, please do let me know. Well, I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.